So welcome to everybody who's just joined us. Today we're going to be looking at moths, moth trapping and moth ID and moth resources. So we're thrilled you can join us. And as always, if you have any questions at the end of the presentation, then do get in touch and we can then put you in direct touch with David Beattie, who is our in-house expert and will be able to help you through. David, welcome.
Or
One
use
of
the
our
forum.
amazing conservation advisors, and over to you.
Thank you. Or does the forum still operate? Remember, PIAs have a forum, so they could do questions on there.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm trying to be funny and failing. As it says, father and mother, or should it be mother?
I thought it was funny.
Why moths? Well, a number of reasons. Why moths? Firstly, with birds, you're never quite sure where they'll be. I've been chasing a garden warbler today and not been able to find it. With flowers, although you know where they'll be because flowers don't move unless it's a trivid, you still have to travel to places. With moths, they come to you, which is always an advantage. The one we don't want, that's the clothes moth. There are actually only 3 species of moths that destroy clothes, of over 2,000 that don't. Some people say, "Oh, moths will destroy my clothes." Well, there's only 3 of the species that do out of over 2,000. So, how do we catch them? 2 of the traps I use are like this. The one on the left is called a Skinner trap with a mercury vapor bulb, and I had that operating last night and caught my first or second load of moths this month. It's been pathetic in April and May. That's a mercury vapor bulb. And on the right-hand side is a Robinson trap with an actinic bulb. Both these 2 are mains operated, and you can either physically switch them on and off or use a timer. I tend to go physical on because it means I can then go searching for bats as well on the park that I put these out to try to catch moths. You could also have these other different types of traps. These both 2 again are actinic bulbs, and they are powered with batteries and far more sensible, a light sensor. So they come on when it goes dark and switch off again when it comes light. So the again, different sorts of moth traps, and there are several that you can use. There are other good ways to start. You can either waste some treacle and some beer, and some people, it's a mix. You can find out online how to mix that mixture. Try not to drink it all yourself. But some people paint it on strips of wood. Some people put it on strips of cloth and hang up, and the moths get attracted to the treacle and beer, but as other stuff does as well. Also, you can put just a lovely white sheet out, and that's a little poster from the Wildlife Trust Watch Group, which is for young people. So all you see is a white sheet, a washing line, some pegs, a bright lamp, torches, and then just shine it and wait for them to come. It's actually better doing that when it gets really warm in summer. And there are other ways that people do it. They use pheromones, which I've never used, but people do that. One of the moths that we try using pheromones for in this part of the world is the emperor moth, which is absolutely stunning moth, absolutely stunner. And maybe we'll be able to see what that looks like a bit later on in my presentation. This is the one I actually started with just about 3 or 4 years ago. It cost about £120, and I got that from the NHBS, the Natural History Book Service or Supply, and I found that very good. It's collapsible, and also now I've got an adapter for it, so I can use that with battery as well. So again, I don't have to rely on mains power to operate that. But I find it really good. Part of the reason because of that is the white, for want of a box, it's not a box, or the white flaps also means that some of the moths will remain there in the morning after the bulb's gone off. So again, it's not just in the trap itself, but also on the outside. And I'm sure you've noticed that on the other traps, there are egg boxes which we put in. And then once you've switched the bulb off in the morning, if it's a mercury vapor, don't touch the bulb for a bit until it cools down because it hurts. Then you come to the, then check on the underside and roll around the trap and in the egg boxes, and there you'll find your moths. Moths hibernate in all stages depending on species. Some hibernate as adults, some as eggs, some as caterpillars, some as chrysalises, and some people actually go around searching for the moths in hibernation, eggs and caterpillars and chrysalises. I don't have that enthusiasm, but some people do. It depends on how you feel. But like lots of things, it's worth trying. If you don't like it, doesn't matter. If you've made a mistake, who's going to tell? Then these are the two of the identification guides that I use. The one on the left-hand side is the Field Guide to the Moths of Great Britain and Ireland. These are macro moths, MACRO, macro moths. And the one on the right-hand side, that's a newer micro moth guide. Notice the macro moths are 880 species, and micros nearly 1,300 species. I've never caught any, very many of the micros, but this year that's one I'm trying to learn. I like to give myself a challenge. So they're the two guides that I have used. Here's another guide by that micro moth guide. The one on the left-hand side also has a ring-bound version called a concise guide, as does this guide, which you can see in the picture here, Gateway Guide. And the advantage with this is, because you often get a moth in a pot, and you can actually take it to the guide, and the advantage with having a ring-bound guide is this. It stays open. So you can then get the moth in your pot and bring it to your guide, and all the moths, particularly in the concise guide, the pictures are exact same size as any moth that you might be able to catch, which makes it very, very helpful. If they look alike but they're different size, then again, that's another help to making you decide which of the moths you might have caught. So you get a moth pot, take it to the guide that says there at the bottom. The image is the same size as the moth, so you can place the pot over the image and help you identify which moth you caught. These two are online apps to help you. One on the left-hand side, that's from Butterfly Conservation to identify a moth. And on the right, some people on their phone use that. They use that where it says click on the camera, and some people get help from identification that way. I personally, that's just me, I find these unhelpful because sometimes you click on a moth and take a picture, then see what it says, it identifies, and you find it's a moth that only appears in Australia or the States. Well, that's no good, is it? So, because there are similar moths to abroad than there are here. So personally, I do not find this helpful. You may do, but that's up to you. Like I said, if you want to try them, it's worth a try. If you won't have a go, you won't ever know. And as I say here, I would suggest you start in spring, partly because they're lower numbers and you have try and search through lots and lots and lots. And you've got time to learn any moths that might come into trap. Some people do trap in winter because there is a December moth, there's a winter moth. But for me, maybe it's my age, winter is often too cold and too wet for any decent amount of putting your moth trap out. And this April has been very, very poor indeed. It's been absolutely pathetic. Apparently it's been the 6th wettest ever April in the United Kingdom. The problem with this is I'm also into bats, and I'm in a couple of bat groups, both the North Lancs and South Lancs bat group. And certainly I had a contact from the lady who runs the North Lancashire bat group, and she's saying, what have the moths been like in the rest of Lancashire? Because here in the north of Lancashire, we have several brown long-eared bats have been brought into care because they've been undernourished. There hasn't been enough food out for them to catch and feed on. So again, it has an effect on what else is happening. So as I said, I was starting spring. April is usually decent enough, but this year it has been pretty pathetic. For me to identify as one of these two methods. On the left-hand side, that is not a real moth, that's a picture I cut out, but you can see what I do. Lepidoptera, which is the name for moths and butterflies, being scaly-winged, and they're very easy to brush those scales off. So I get a small brush and try to carefully brush the moth into the pot, and then I can take it to the book. Occasionally, I use the system on the right-hand side, particularly if the moth is in an inconvenient place in the moth trap. It sometimes ends up in weird and wonderful places. So I take a photograph while it's still in there, and then I can use the one I use more than those I mentioned earlier is iNaturalist. And then that gives you a good guide as to what that moth may be. But again, the problem I found with it as well is that sometimes it'll tell you this moth is such and such a thing. And then when you check the details of that moth, again, it's only found in North Africa or in Australia or in Canada. So always be careful if you use that method. Again, the useful but not 100% reliable. So they're the two methods that I use. Another way, of course, is many of us tend to go in either WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups. There is, for me, there's a Lancashire Lepidopterist. And if I find a moth I haven't a clue about, I'll sometimes post that on, say, can anyone give us a clue what this moth is? And there's always some person who knows a lot more than I do, and they'll say, oh, that was, and they usually give the Latin name, and I was pathetic at Latin, but I look it up again, and that's another way of helping to identify it. So you'll often find the mothers, just like mothers, are very caring and look after each other. You sometimes get invaders in your trap. The right-hand one is very proliferant at the moment, caddisfly, loads of them around. And on the left-hand side, this is a wasp, not the common wasp that will go after you in autumn, but this one actually lays her eggs inside moth and butterfly caterpillars. So obviously where there's moths and butterflies around, that wasp will also be around. And I took that one out of my trap about 3 weeks ago, but that's Ichneumon wasp. I haven't written his name down because I couldn't spell it properly, but it's again, that's as it says there, it lays her eggs inside the moth and butterfly caterpillars. What might a moth look like? Well, you can see here 3 very, very different shapes of moth. And now I'm sorry I put that right up on the right-hand side. Maybe you'll see later why I meant that. Again, on the left-hand side, like a T shape, a lovely white plume moth. Then in the middle, you tend to shy away from that because it looks anything except a moth, doesn't it? But that is a lunar hornet clearwing. So it looks like a hornet, so it's saying, don't eat me. Well, I'm not going to eat you, sorry. And then the right-hand one, that's what moth looks like. But you tend to look at that and think, is it a moth? Or is it a fox? Some of you might be able to see that looks like a fox's face. A certain Mr. Lester told me that one. Got to give credit where it's due. Also, 3 interesting ones. The left-hand one is a moth called the peppered moth, which actually shows how clean our atmosphere is getting. If it had caught this moth in the 30s and 40s, it would have been much darker. But now, with our atmosphere getting a lot more smoke-free and cleaner, then the moth has changed to suit the cleaner air. So that's an indicator of how clean our air is getting. That middle weird-looking one, I only found out about it yesterday. It is brand new to the UK. In fact, this I think it's only been found this last month or two. But there's one of 53 this century. The 21st century, already been 53 new moths in the UK this century. And they named it after the lady who found it, someone called Mulligan. And the one on the right-hand side is one I get bored with catching. It's called the large yellow underwing. I mean, you get scores and scores and scores. Sometimes I've gone to the moth trap. Oh, there's 60 moths, 45 of which would be large yellow underwing. But again, I'll be glad when that does come back, because that is one of the main food moths for, again, the brown long-eared bat. And that's how you find out where the bats have been, because you find the wings of the moth under the tree, which has been sitting to eat on the body and discard the wings. These are some of my favorites. On the left-hand side, brimstone, just like the brimstone butterfly, almost like the brimstone butterfly. And I've been arguing for at least 8 years for the country park on which I work to get the food plant for the brimstone butterfly and brimstone moth planted. And last winter, they managed to plant one. Hooray! So maybe next year we'll get some brimstone moths and brimstone butterflies. The middle one sounds like it should be a musical instrument. It's called burnished brass. You can't beat a bit of brass. But that mark, it doesn't show it well on the photograph, but actually shines, it shimmers, just like metal brass does. And the one on the right-hand side, again, another of my favorites, that's a gold spot. And again, it actually looks like real gold. It is absolutely fantastic moth. Really, really beautiful. And camouflage. On the left-hand side, is it a moth or is it a stick? Again, it's really wonderful camouflage with some moths. That is brilliant, that one. The one in the middle is, I think it's called Peach. And I did a BioBlitz at a church 3 or 4 years ago, and that moth was on the wall of that church. And even though we knew where that moth was, we still couldn't see it. And then if you look to this right-hand side, there is a moth there. Hopefully my technology works again as it did earlier. Keep watching so if you can see the moth, which is wonderfully camouflaged. Keep watching. Look about the middle. Look at that. Is that brilliant camouflage or what? I think that's absolutely fantastic. I'm beginning to get excited about moths, almost as do to get excited about birds. You may then get a reputation of knowing everything. I don't know everything. I just pretend I know everything. But 2 things. These are 2 interesting moths. On the left-hand side, the country park on which I work, we have the cafe and reception area is self-build. and it was straw bale with lime rendering and wooden frames. And one person found this left-hand moth in one of the wooden parts of the frame of this building. Davey, what's this? Oh, I got excited because the wood we actually got on the part from which I volunteer. That's a death head hawk moth. It's a pity we've gone past May the 4th, or I could have sung den, 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 because it does look a bit like Darth Vader's head, that doesn't it? On the right-hand side, another query. David, a friend of mine was doing her early morning run on Longage Fell, and this moth was on the path. She picked it up and asked me what it was. Well, that is a cracker. That's the emperor moth I referred to earlier. An absolute beautiful, beautiful, beautiful moth. I could be biased. Finally, you can never go on holiday. Andy, do you know what this one is?
Clifton Nonpareil.
A friend of mine is a birder, is a ringer. He's been mothing now for about 5 years. And last September, he went away on holiday. But one of his mates, who's also a birder, but not a mother, he said, can you just check my moth trap for me? And this particular morning, he went to open the moth trap. And he said, Dave, there's this weird looking moth that I've not seen before. What is it? And the explosion comes from the other end that he'd gone on holiday and missed that moth, which is that is the prize that most mothers hope to get. Plus, mainly it is caught in the south of England or on the coast. This is in Blackburn, at least 20 miles away from the coast, and he got this moth. So he says, I'm never going to go on holiday ever again, in case it comes again. Okay, so finally, never go. Once you start mothing, you'll never stop. All right. Thank you. I hope you found that helpful. Any questions? And Andy will give you the answers.
Oh, no. Thanks, David. That was a really lovely little summary of moths and moth trapping. And my reflection as I was looking at your picture was, once you get into moths, it's very hard to stop. It's a lot of fun. And I've enjoyed doing it for years. Actually, the last couple of years, I found it a lot harder to do because actually it's so much more unpredictable. You can put a moth trap up and catch absolutely nothing. And so the last couple of years have been very, very much more challenging in terms of moth trapping, which is definitely, well, it's a significant part of what's going on with the climate. But we've got a few good days of weather at the moment, so this is the perfect time to get out and do it. So I'll be out there tonight with my moth trap. This is my funnel. So all good moth traps have some kind of device on the top where the moths crawl in because they got excited by the UV light, and then slide down through a hole at the bottom and end up trapped. It's completely harmless to them. But once they get trapped, they immediately try and hide from the sunlight. So you put a whole series of egg boxes in the bottom, which they'll then crawl underneath and disappear. So you have to make sure when you're taking them out that you take them out early in the morning and not in direct sunlight. Otherwise, the first thing that happens is they all fly away. And even if you have had a full moth trap, it turns out to be very empty again. David, that was brilliant. We don't have time for many questions, purely because we need to get on into our time of prayer together. So we're going to do two things. I'm going to open it up to 2 questions, and then any further questions, David has a standard A Rocha email address. It's david.beatty@arocha.org. So if you've got anything you want to ask David, then please email him after today's session. We'll continue recording while we ask the questions. So wave your hand wildly. Nick.
The food plant for the brimstone, I know, but what about the brimstone moth food plant?
I'll have to check my book for that.
Right.
I don't actually know everything. I just pretend I know everything.
Okay.
It will say it in that moth guide, the thick one that I showed on the first slide. It actually tells you the when and where it hibernates, whether it hibernates as an adult or a caterpillar or whatever. And then it also tells you the food plots are there as well.
While we're praying, Mr. Beatty, you could go and grab Lewington and have a look and see what it says.
I shall.
Brilliant. Any further questions from anybody? Wave if you do. I'm scanning through. We'll never know whether Anne Martin is waving because I can't see her.
One thing I would add, try to vary the times or positions of your moth trap, because the birds get to know when you're opening your moth trap and they come for breakfast.
That's right, they do. Yes, I've had an entire moth trap wiped out by a couple of very, very hungry blue tits once. So yeah, no, that's right. Brill. Okay, David, thank you. Any other questions on moth traps to David? Just one thing to add. So I mentioned the challenges of climate, and we don't really need reminding of that. But one way that does help in terms of moth trapping, and it's just worth remembering in terms of the welfare, is it's actually a good idea not to moth trap when it is really cold, because what happens generally is that moths are often nectar feeders, like butterflies and other insects, and they will use their reserves up to get to the light. So when it's relatively warm, and it's a warm patch like it is at the moment, absolutely fine. But if it's very, very cold, it can actually spell the end of the very small number of moths that come to the light. So just well worth flagging that at this point. David, thank you. For those of you who've been listening and watching online to the recording at another time, please do keep the questions coming. And just a reminder, questions to David at david.beattie, Beattie, @arosha.org, and he'll be more than happy to answer, or at least try and answer the questions you have. Thanks, David.